Story 1. My name is Evan M. I'm 34, a land surveyor, and this happened in the far northern edge of California in Siskiyou County in the fall of 2016. If you've worked field jobs out there, you know how the rain can change a dirt road into a ribbon of clay that won't let you go forward or back. I had been flying a small mapping drone over a grid of parcels near an old rail spur, timberland, mostly stumps and stubborn blackberry, and I watched the feed freeze, jump, and then stop altogether somewhere near the tree line. The drone didn't come home. Night came fast, rain that sounded like ball bearings on the canopy, cold enough to sharpen the wet air into something I felt along my cheeks. I found the house by accident, a blue Victorian that the weather had rubbed down to a gray that still remembered its color. The porch had lost more boards than it kept. Every part of the place said no, but the sky said now. And I had a tripod, a rangefinder, a pack full of batteries that didn't like cold, and a phone that failed the second I needed maps. I told myself I would wait 20 minutes for the heaviest rain to pass, then head back to the truck and try again at first light. Inside, the smell hit first. Not mildew exactly, something like river water, cold, mineral, full of silt, trapped in old wood. I stepped through what had once been a sitting room, my boots thudding on boards that softened and then stiffened under the heel as if the house were testing me. I set the tripod by the front window, more to make the place look like a job site than because I needed it. Rain rattled the glass. My own breath felt loud, and at the same time, the room swallowed it. I'm used to the way empty structures throw your voice back at you. This one absorbed sound. I said, 20 minutes, just to hear a voice. It came out thin and didn't return. Normal steps, inventory, check batteries, wipe the lens. I swept my flashlight over the crown molding, noting the grain patterns I always notice, a habit from measuring interiors when I was a junior on the crew. The darting cone of light picked up wallpaper ghosts in vertical strips, the suggestion of picture frames, a brown stain winding down from a ceiling corner as if gravity were confused about its path. To keep my hands busy, I started doing what I always do, measure and note. I paced off the room, 10 feet, then another 8, no, 9, no, 8.5 to the wall with the window. I took the laser rangefinder from my pocket, clicked the beam to the opposite corner. The red dot was steady until it reached the juncture where two walls met, and then the signal cut out. A flicker. Then it returned when I moved the dot away. I thought about dust, mirrors, irregular paint, whatever. There was a sound in there that wasn't mine, not a footstep, not exactly. My steps had their own weight and rhythm. But a moment after each of mine, a second step grazed the air, the faintest creak, delayed by a half beat. If I walked, something followed my cadence by echoing the idea of it. Not the sound, just the timing. I told myself the floorboards were flexing, oscillating from my weight, springing back half a second later. That's a thing that happens. I've felt it. The windows should have thrown rain noise into the room, but it was fainter inside than it had been on the porch, like I had gone underwater. I went to the window anyway, because the view of rain through old glass calms me. It makes time sound like it has edges. I leaned close enough to fog the pain. The glass was cold enough to ache my lips. And there, in the thin blur I made, another small halo filmed in and out of existence, not aligned with my breath but a little to the right, just enough that I knew it wasn't a trick of the glass. It pulsed in and out with my breathing, perfectly matched, but not mine. I told myself I was tired and taking shadows personally. I stepped back, exhaled slowly, and ran the rangefinder again because numbers usually quiet me. The room refused to behave. I measured the long wall twice, then 3 times. I sketched a quick plan in my notebook, habit, adding little hash marks at each angle like I always do. When I tried to close the shape, the last angle wouldn't meet its neighbor. Out by a degree or two in a way my hand knew was wrong for simple fatigue. The angles didn't add. I erased, recalculated, and stared at a rectangle that acted like a trapezoid whenever I looked at it from the wrong place. The curtain that should have hung still at the far doorway lifted with no breeze to earn it. The rangefinder went dead again when I aimed at the darkest corner. No reading, just a little symbol blinking like a shallow breath. I turned to the door to leave, which is the rational end to a situation like this, and my boot found a board that spoke back to me in a long, pained note. The delayed knot step answered a beat later, like a refrain. Rain hammered. Everything smelled like cold water. I went to the window a final time to put my nose to the glass and force myself to accept that breath belongs to a body. My reflection stood where it should. But my reflection's shoulder was closer to the glass than my shoulder was to the room. A misalignment, small, stupid, just enough. The second breath halo showed up again beside my cheek. I could feel my own lungs, the way you do in the cold, like two careful hands holding air. The halo pulsed with me, then once without me, an extra beat, like someone catching up. The weather shifted all at once, the way mountain rain sometimes does, sharper for a minute, then as if a zipper ran through the clouds. The sound came back into the room like air rushing into a bell jar. My phone screen woke up with the map I'd wanted an hour before, then went dark. I picked up the tripod, stuffed the rangefinder back into my pocket and left, not in a run, but not slow either. The porch boards groaned and then answered themselves again, one beat late. I slept in the truck in the pullout down the road, the way I've done when jobs run long and cabins are far. When it finally grayed into morning, I went back because the drone was still somewhere, and I was tired of feeling 12 years old. The house looked smaller in daylight, less like it was holding its breath. The porch wood had dried into the color of old paper. I walked to the door to prove there had been nothing in the night but weather and a surveyor's imagination. Just at the threshold in the damp dirt where the rain had bounced up and freckles had formed, there were prints. Not boot tracks to or from the door. Not animal. Two human-like footprints that began at the line where inside becomes outside and went backward into the house, not from the road. The toes were soft in the mud, like someone had stepped down from the air onto the sill. They pointed in, not out. I didn't go back in. I told myself the prints were old, water-swollen, transformed by runoff. I told myself I was tired. I told myself a lot. The drone turned up a day later, half buried in gravel where the road turned, which made no sense with the last telemetry but gave me an excuse to stop thinking about the house. After that job, I started checking my drawings more often. Every so often I'll close a field sketch and one angle will resist, as if it remembers a room it once refused to become. On cold, wet nights, I pull curtains before I turn on lights because glass can be more than glass. I don't measure when it rains if I can help it, and when my breath fogs a window, I step back to see if it fogs alone. Since that night, silence makes me feel watched more than any stare ever has. Story 2. There are hours of the night that feel like hospital corridors even when you're nowhere near a hospital. My name is Lena R. I'm 42. I work nights as a home health aide in Lorain County, Ohio, and this was in the winter of 2019, one of those cold snaps that make metal ring when you touch it. It was a Tuesday into Wednesday, between 2 and almost 4 in the morning. I'd just finished changing wound dressings for a gentleman who could no longer get out of bed. The house had that steady machine breath to it. Oxygen concentrator, low and patient. When I stepped outside, the cold snapped the damp from my lashes. My car didn't even pretend to try. The engine clicked, the dash went dark, and my phone had no bars. The road was empty. The kind of snow you can't see falling until your hat crusts white. Across the field, a line of trees framed the shape of a farmhouse I knew from daytime, condemned years ago, the kind people park near to drink or dare one another in the summer. It was maybe 200 yards away. The wind sliced so straight that standing still hurt more than walking. I carry a backup charger, but my fingers had gone dumb, and the plug fought me. I told myself I'd step into the farmhouse just for a minute, break the wind, check the phone, let my face thaw, call a tow if I caught a bar of signal. The front door of the farmhouse had no knob, only a circle of darker wood. It was lighter inside than outside. Snowlight, dry wood catching whatever the sky had to give. The air inside had a flavor, like metal and cold wood and something faintly sweet, old varnish. My jacket smelled like disinfectant and skin, the way it does when you've worked too many shifts, and that smell felt almost warm against the emptiness of the house. I moved slow. Abandoned places are more dangerous for what you can see than what you can't. Nails, holes, the habit things have of collapsing all at once. A wall clock hung at the end of the hall, a schoolhouse kind with a hexagon frame. The hands were stopped at 2:17. When I walked by, the pendulum was still. Then, just once, it twitched and gave a single, dry tick, as if it had stored up months of waiting for me and had to let 1 second go. My breath made a small cloud in front of my face, and my phone's flashlight put a hard circle of white on the floor that shook because my hand couldn't decide what was shiver and what was nerves. There was a coat on a nail by the door, child-sized, navy canvas with a lining patterned with planets. Too clean for the house it hung in. No dust skirt on the shoulders, no cobweb thread from nail to sleeve. I told myself someone had used this place for shelter recently and left in a hurry. That made sense until I touched the hem, and my fingers came away so cold they burned, as if the coat had been outside longer than the door had been open. I tried the phone. The screen found a sliver of signal. 1 bar, then none, then 1, in and out with a regularity that felt too deliberate. Short, shallow, pause, short, shallow, pause. The exact cadence of a sick person's breath. I unlocked the screen to call a tow, and the second my thumb hit the first number of my PIN, a stair on the nearby staircase gave a dry, complaining sound. I paused. The house stilled. I tried the second number, another stair, the third, and another. 4 numbers, 4 little groans, spaced exactly the way my thumb moved. The hair under my hat prickled in a way I know from nights with patients, right before an alarm goes off, when your body hears it before your ears do. My pager, yes, we still use them, was off. I keep it off in the car and use the app on my phone at night because the chirp can wake clients. In the pocket of my scrubs, the pager gave a soft, low battery kind of chirp. I took it out. The screen was blank. I pressed the power button, and it stayed blank. It chirped again in my hand, twice this time, a warble you only hear when battery is near dead. But when I held the button long enough to burn my thumb, the battery icon said full. I told myself to go back into the cold. Sometimes that's the kinder choice. But wind has a way of convincing you that inside is safer, even if your skin disagrees. I step toward the stairs because if there's someone living in an abandoned house, you want to announce yourself before they announce themselves to you. The dust in the beam of my phone changed from glitter to a kind of tremble, a vibration you see more than hear. It wasn't all the dust, just a patch under the second stair, shaking like someone's weight had settled there, a knee or a hand bracing to look. I held my light still. The tremble kept going a heartbeat longer than made sense, then stilled. There was a sound above me I knew from 100 midnights, the whine and clunk of a hospital bed adjusting position, the ratcheting of metal. It came from the room at the end of the upstairs hall. This house hadn't had electricity in years. No one was running machinery up there. Yet the sound came in 2 soft bursts, the way a tired body shifts and then lets go. My pager chirped again, softer, almost embarrassed, and the coat on the nail moved. Not a sway like wind pulls a thing, a single nod, as if weight had been added and then lifted from the sleeve. I stood there with my gloves half on and half off, unsure whether to announce my name or shut my mouth. Training says you announce. Instinct said anything, listening, already knew I was there. "My name is Lena," I said anyway, my voice smaller than I hoped. "I'm not here to cause trouble. My car died. I'm waiting for it to warm enough to try again." The word warm came out and made the room feel colder by comparison. I don't know how long I stood still. My phone said 3:31 when I finally moved again, like I had blinked and lost minutes. Something in my chest relieved itself when I saw the doorway to outside. I tucked the pager deep into the coat pocket like that would fix it and took a step. A second step followed mine, not heavy, but timed so precisely behind me that my body understood it before my mind had words, followed, not echoed. The cold bit my back through my jacket like teeth. I told the air no out loud, because sometimes you just say a shape around your fear and walk through it. When I reached the door, the wall clock clicked in its case. Not a tick, the sound of a hand dropped by a notch it had no spring to claim. I looked without meaning to, and the time still said 2:17. I stepped out. The wind made itself known with a shove. In the snow light, my car in the distance looked less like safety than a promise I wanted to believe. I didn't turn around. That felt important. I walked. My boots made their own hard squeaks, and nothing copied them. The car started on the first try. The temperature on the dash read -2. The heater coughed, then delivered air uncommitted to any temperature. I drove without thinking about frostbite or the legality of a busted taillight. When I reached the edge of town, the pager, still off, chirped twice, the exact 2-note chirp that calls you to a bed when someone stops breathing. It was 3:40. I turned it on, as if that would explain something. The display lit blue and showed the time in tiny digits. 2:17. Then the screen went normal and caught up with the car clock. A week later, in a different house, the overnight was uneventful. No alarms, just the hush my clients and I have an understanding with. At 2:17, with the halls quiet, my pager chirped twice in my pocket. Not loud, not scolding. The exact tone I'd heard in the farmhouse. I took it out and stared at an empty message queue. I would love to tell you I wrote it up, reported equipment malfunction, got a new unit. I didn't. I put the pager on the counter next to a bowl of plastic fruit and watched it for the rest of the shift, like it might try to speak again. Since that night, I avoid stairwells when I can, and when I can't, I keep my hand on the rail and move like I'm not being timed. I change the batteries in everything early. I have a new car. It starts even when the cold has a knife under its tongue. But there are stretches of time, 2:17 is one, that feel like someone leaned near enough to read over my shoulder and forgot to lean away. I tell myself houses are only as haunted as the people we put in them. Every now and then, the dark answers with a small, patient chirp. Story 3. If you do this job long enough, you begin to hear buildings the way mechanics hear engines. My name is Marcus D. I'm 29, a city code inspector in Baltimore, and this was August of 2021 in a row house that had caught fire earlier that summer. We schedule pre-demolition checks late sometimes. Fewer people around to watch you tape off a life that won't come back. That night my backup from BPD texted he was caught on something across town, said he'd meet me if I needed him. I had my list, my respirator, my high-lumen flashlight, a clipboard I've covered with hand-scratched reminders over the years. I'd done enough of these that the burned smell had a shape to it in my head, sweet first, then char and wet ash like a campfire you regret. The block had only a few lit windows. The city never truly sleeps, but some streets take it personally when you walk them alone. The front door of the rowhouse was a plywood sheet someone had convinced into place with screws that bit into soft studs. The sidewalk had a scatter of busted glass that refused to decide on a shimmer or a dull. I worked the screws loose and shouldered in, telling myself I'd check the structural integrity of the stairs, note joist damage, confirm whether the back wall needed shoring or could be demoed as is. Simple. In and out. Heat lay in the house like it had forgotten how to leave. My mask was a comfort even before I remembered the air quality. The front room had a specific kind of wrong, chairs with chrome legs, 4 of them, dragged from who knows where and lined in a row facing the street-facing window. Each sat at the same distance from the glass, legs making small silver parentheses on the soot. Their backs were dusted evenly, except for a strip where shoulders would have gone, a band as if people had sat long enough to polish a clean oval and then got up in unison. The floor was powdery and slick at the same time. It holds footprints in a way you learn to read, like timestamps that don't need clocks. But there were no prints leading to those chair marks. Just 4 ovals, clean and deliberate, like the floor had decided to remember only the part where someone had stayed still. I noted it out of habit. Chairs aligned, unusual residue patterns, and kept moving. The window had no glass left, just frame, the city on the other side watching me not watch it. I turned my light to the walls and found the third weird thing of the night. Polaroids scattered along the baseboard like someone had been shuffling them and then dropped the deck. Same subject repeated. This very window, taken from inside at different times of day. Grainy blue morning, a thicker afternoon, one orange with sodium streetlight. Each photo had a dot, a tiny spiral of ink made with a ballpoint at the bottom left corner of the window frame. Not the center, not the edge. The same little mark every time. There are moments you want another person present, not because you're afraid, but because your brain wants to divide a thing in half. I crouched and picked up one of the photos. You could see where the photographer's thumb had smudged a corner. The dot was a fraction of an inch from the wood trim. My own window stood in front of me like a live version of the picture. I lifted the Polaroid to frame the real window because my hands needed to prove something about angles and coincidence. When I lined up the trim in the image with the real trim, the little pen dot sat exactly over the space my left shoulder now occupied. The idea was absurd even as it landed. The photo, a decade old at least given the age of the film, had marked where I would stand while holding it. I stepped right. The Polaroid's dot no longer covered me. I stepped back. It did. You tell yourself a lot of reasonable things then, about chance, about someone's habit of marking a defect in wood, about sight lines, because the alternative is not reasonable and you still have an attic to evaluate. Past the front room, the hall tightened like houses do in this city, compressing you between stairs and kitchen, asking if you need to pass. The stairs held, though the treads had eaten smoke and some of the risers sagged. I checked joists with my light. The ceiling above had lathe showing through the plaster like ribs. The back wall told the story of hoses and collapse. I spoke into the recorder app on my phone through my mask. 2 times 10 seconds, partial charring, third stringer compromised, recommend. And I stopped because the app was playing back my own breath in a way my mouth wasn't making. It wasn't loud, just sound that did not belong to the present moment. I took the phone away from my face and saw the red recording dot blinking. My reflection floated back at me in the black of the screen. Mask, light halo. The app was still recording. Under my own voice, I heard something wind past like you hear a car in another lane, silted, far, a shape more than words. I ended the recording and hit play because I wanted to prove it was a glitch. You hear things when you talk under a respirator. My voice came tinny. Then, almost under the floor of it, there was another voice in the red hiss, my badge number, spoken with certainty in a mouth I did not know. It wasn't a reading voice, no upward lift, no question, just the numbers, one after another, the way you say them at a counter when someone asks you to confirm identity. I stopped the audio. My scalp tightened, that primal drawstring feeling. I recorded again, stating my name and the address out loud, then walked back to the front to catch more bars. I played it back fresh. The undervoice waited, then repeated my number. I hadn't spoken it. Outside, a cop car burped a siren a few streets over. "See?" I told myself. "Sound carries in these blocks like wind does in alleys. Maybe you picked up a voice from the radio of someone walking past. Maybe you picked up your own thought. But the badge number sat there between syllables like a small, neat brick." I shut the app and slipped the phone back into my pocket and felt for the pen in my shirt, because ink and paper have a comfort your hands sometimes need. I wrote the time. 22:14. I wrote the word weird, even though that doesn't belong in a report. I lifted another Polaroid. The dot was in the same place. I raised it to the real frame and found my shoulder again, like the two had a magnetic agreement. Heat crawled down my neck, not from the August air, but from the sense I was being measured in return. I flipped the photo over. There was pencil writing faint enough to be almost shameful. The numbers looked more like somebody testing a dull point than trying to leave a message. 22.14, 22.16, 22.22. I checked my clipboard. 10:14 p.m. had happened while I wasn't looking. The chairs still faced the hole where glass had been. The night outside held itself still. Then, the posture of the room changed the way a person in a chair shifts weight without meaning to. Not a sound, a subtle sit-up in the air. I don't know how else to say it. My light hit the window and caught two wet points where the streetlight bounced. A reflection with the jealousy of eyes. It could have been a car far away, or the residue catching sharp. The points moved left, then right, then were gone. I waited for the sound of a passing headlight. None came. My radio crackled, not the police one, the cheap one we used to call dispatch, and then smoothed as if a thumb had stroked the static. I turned to say something half-humorous to an empty room. The air next to my left ear cooled, a breath temperature that belonged to neither August nor me. The recorder app on my phone woke itself in my pocket. I didn't pull it out. I left. People think you run at moments like that. You don't, not if you respect old houses. You put your hand to the wall to steady yourself, you step carefully around holes you can't see, and you leave with a face that says you're only going to your truck for a different tool. I wrote the report that night in the glow of the cab light, the sweat cooling to stick on my back. Unsafe for entry without support. Recommend immediate fence and demolition. Words I had written before, now wearing a weight they hadn't earned. The recording sat on my phone. I didn't play it again for a week. When I did, it said the same thing. The numbers neat as pennies. Since then, windows have felt less like ways to see and more like ways to be placed. I catch myself checking the corners of rooms for chairs that face nothing. It's become a tick. Stop at a site, take a breath, lift a phone not to document, but to make sure silence is only silence. The Polaroid I kept, one of them went home with me by accident, stays in my desk, face down under a stapler, a silly superstition. Sometimes in the morning when I unlock the office, I think I hear a voice try my badge number on for size, the way you test a key in a lock you want to work. I still do my job, buildings still sing. But every pane of glass is a question now, and some answers say my name like it belongs to them. Story 4. Some desserts don't feel empty. They feel like they've learned how to conserve notice. I'm Ruth Ann Keller, R.A. if we work together, 63 now, ex-sheriff's deputy out of Otero County, New Mexico. In the summer of 2005, I was between long weeks, picking up side work as a caretaker for properties folks owned but didn't love. One of those was an old adobe outside Piñon. The man who inherited it lived in Albuquerque and wanted to make sure no one had stripped copper or moved in. My contract said check once at night and once during the day, log any signs of entry, call for backup if there were intruders. I took it because I knew the road, and I don't mind the company of structures that have outlived the people who made them. Just before midnight, I drove the Crown Vic onto the packed dirt shoulder. The stars sat close enough to lick. Heat still breathed off the ground and met the high desert wind halfway. The house sat low, thick walls soft as risen bread, the kind of adobe that holds cool in noon heat and releases it when the air goes thin. The front door had a heavy latch and a crossbar scar someone had sanded smooth decades ago. I stood still a long beat before I lifted it, listening for an engine on the road that didn't belong to me, for a voice that would prefer I didn't. Inside, the air was cooler by a degree only your skin respects. The beam of my flashlight made a narrow tunnel in the dim. Dust hung in the light like little fish in a jar, moving as if the house had indoor wind. That's the first thing I noticed. Desert air moves with a logic you learn. This was the wrong kind. A slip side to side that had no draft to cause it. The place smelled like clay after rain and something clean-edged metallic, like a coin you worry with your tongue. You learn to clear rooms the same way every time, so fear can't negotiate with you. Right turn, pie the corner, check the kiva in the front room, the little banco bench someone once used to set coffee on. My boots carried grit that whispered loud in the quiet. I spoke my name anyway, because leaving a name is sometimes like leaving a door open. Ruth Ann, sheriff's office. Well, used to be. Habit makes you give the voice authority even when you're alone. No shoe prints in the powder that had sifted down over months, no fresh issues. But the dust on the earthen floor had a pattern I hadn't seen before. Not footprints, not animal. Shallow waves side by side, like someone had shifted their weight from one foot to the other in the same spot for a long time, patient and small. The waves were too neat to be wind. The kiva's mouth was a deeper dark than I like. The flashlight cut it into a shape. Nothing there except the feeling of a breath that had learned endurance. The radio on my belt, the cheap Motorola that never minded abuse, gave a small pop and then went polite again. The only time radios do that in my experience is when you duck under steel or wire or something that makes them remember their own job. There wasn't much metal in there besides nails. I moved down the narrow hall. The ceiling vigas sat in parallel, old timber with the scars of hand tools and termites that had thought about trying their luck and gone elsewhere. Under each viga, when I stood exactly centered, the radio clicked a little. Only there. Step forward and it quit. Back under, and it would give a shy little hello of static. Okay, I said, because sometimes talking out loud keeps the second brain in your spine from inventing outcomes. Okay. The kitchen had a window with a view of the kind of dark that refuses to disclose distance. On the sill, someone a long time ago had left a clay cup the color of bread crust. The first time I swept the room with my light, the cup's handle pointed left. On the second pass, it pointed a quarter-inch toward me. Not a rotation you see in a blink. More like something you notice the way you notice age, by subtraction. I kept my breathing the same. I turned to the back room with the mattress that still kept its arrangement of sheet wrinkles from years before. The smell in there had the memory of sleep, but not of people. My flashlight drifted across a bent nail half driven into the jamb. The head had been pointing down. Now it pointed toward the room. The kind of difference you'd bet a beer on in a bar and lose friends over. The corridor between the rooms narrowed to a throat, adobe smooth to my shoulder. When I stepped into that space, the floorboards under the plaster gave in a rhythm that did not match me. My right foot landed and the floor 3 planks ahead flexed first, like someone else had chosen to meet me in the middle. I stopped. The give stopped. I stepped back. The floor flexed ahead again, coming toward me in sequence, soft, deliberate, the way a person knows how to make boards talk when they want to hear if you'll answer. "Don't," I said, "because sometimes you can ask a house to be kind." My voice came back flat, and then didn't at all, like the walls ate it and made a note of the taste. My flashlight flickered, not the gutter of a dying battery, but a single, decisive blink, and then held steady as if embarrassed. The dust at knee height flowed into the beam sideways, all at once, like a tide pulling under a boat. I put my back to the wall, because that's what you do when there are angles you can't keep in your eyes. The old habit of my hand found the butt of the sidearm I wasn't carrying anymore. My thumb met air where a strap used to be. I told myself about pack rats, about convection, about what wind can do when 100 tiny mouths in an old wall all drink at the same time. A small sound came from low to the floor in the far corner of the hall, like 2 fingers sliding across paper grit. When I lowered the beam to it, I saw 4 little arcs pressed into the powder, not claw marks, not tracks. 4 curves, neat, like someone had touched the floor gently with fingertips and then lifted them again. New. The edges collapsed as I watched like a slow sigh. There's a way fear makes you precise. I eased along the hall without giving the floor my whole weight at once. The radio made its small, under-roof click, like it knew I was under a beam and wanted me to feel accompanied. I swept the rooms again. The cup was back to facing left. The nail had regained its downward posture. A trick of fatigue, I could tell myself. A test. If you look again and it changes back, which version do you call true? I did what I was paid to do. Checked windows. Checked for forced entry, noted nothing a judge would need to see later. But in the box where I was supposed to write signs of squatters, my pen hung above the paper as if the ink had to make a promise it wasn't sure of. On my last pass through the main room, the wind outside went quiet enough to make the place louder by comparison. The Kiva's dark took on the sense of someone waiting for me to step close again, out of politeness, not malice. I did, because old habits and old houses deserve consistency, and because if you don't look at a thing directly, it will keep showing up at the corners of everything else. I put my light into the black. Dust swam. The air moved in long intervals, an inhale that took too long to get anywhere, an exhale that gave up halfway. I put the crossbar back on the door before I knew my hand meant to. Outside, the heat hugged me like a relative who doesn't listen when you say you have to leave. The sky was a lid of salt. I logged the visit under the dash light. No sign of entry. No evidence of theft. Recommend continued checks. I started the engine and sat with my hands on the wheel until my shoulders remembered how to be part of me. The next morning, I went back in daylight for the second required pass. Light made the house smaller, friendlier. Flies drew their geometry in the kitchen. The cup didn't move. The nail kept its gravity. The floor accepted my steps without commentary. Near the door, I paused, because some part of me thought to check the baseboard at the level a person waiting low would have favored. There, pressed into the powder near the corner where wall meets floor, were the faint crescents of those same 4 fingertips, smudged by the sweep of air that follows a body when it leaves a room. I turned in the key a week later and told the property manager he should call the owner and have someone replace a window frame before the weather made it an excuse to come inside. He asked if there had been trouble. "Just time," I said, which wasn't false. He wrote it down like it satisfied something on his form. Years have made the night in my own kitchen friendly most of the time. On windless evenings, when every window is latched and the AC is a hum you forget you turned on, I'll hear a small shift on the tile, like sand deciding it's had enough of staying put. Not a lot, just a slide and a settle. I remind myself about the grit boots drag in, the way a house contracts when the day lets go. I get a glass of water and stand still until the air, and I figure out who's going to move first. I'm retired, which means my phone rings less, and my mind has time to sit with the things I learned not to look at. The desert keeps its own counsel. The adobe, I think, keeps a little of what it learns. Some nights, with the lights off, I can feel the pause of someone patient tucked into the far corner of the room, watching not to scare, but to make sure I still leave and come back the way I'm supposed to. And on those nights, even my radio, long dead, seems to remember how to click.